1, 2, 3.
We love watching people win.
I just won 250,000. I'm not joking.
Their reaction when they hit a jackpot. Bet on the right horse.
What I tell you?
Or get that giant check. The moment their lives change.
$114 million. How does that sound?
But wins like these are rare. The gambling industry is built on losers, and it's one of the biggest industries in the world. It's worth slightly more than sports, which we really like betting on. And it dwarfs other forms of entertainment. Bet on the right horse.
What I tell you?
Or get that giant check. The moment their lives change.
$114 million. How does that sound?
But wins like these are rare. The gambling industry is built on losers, and it's one of the biggest industries in the world. It's worth slightly more than sports, which we really like betting on. And it dwarfs other forms of entertainment. In the 10 countries where people spend the most gambling, across Europe, East Asia, America, and Australia, the average adult loses hundreds of dollars a year doing it. But that's just the average.
I think the last time I checked on my sort of net balance, as it were, I was at around the negative £2,000 or £3,000 mark.
Within that 4-hour period, I lost the 5,000 I came in with, the 25,000 I won, and then I took another 10,000 off of my cards.
The most I've ever won in a single day of gambling was 1.6 million, and the most I have ever lost in a single day of gambling was, I would say, 1.6 million and change.
A lot to me would be losing $200.
And a lot of people play apps like these, where there's no chance of winning money. Their games look like gambling games, but the payout is virtual. What's real is the money you spend to keep playing. They're called social casinos, and they now generate nearly as much revenue as all the casinos on the Las Vegas Strip. Clearly, people don't just gamble for money. There's something else going on. So, what is it? Why do we gamble?
Well, that's the way it is with gamblers. Easy come, easy go.
Here's the $5,000 ticket.
Everybody would like to have a taste of being rich. And you're looking at the next billionaire, okay?
Step up, last chance to bet.
The 14 million to 1 chance is a lot better than no chance at all.
Gambling on fixed odds betting machines is spreading like an epidemic.
The urge to get something for nothing has Joe in a vice-like grip.
Gambling has been around for a long time. Dice have dots instead of numbers because they predate our numbering system. But gambling became big business when we figured out how to calculate probabilities. Gambling operators are like insurance companies. Every year, homeowners pay for insurance. A lot of homeowners. And then every year, some of those homes will flood. For insurers, a flooded home is a lost bet. They're going to owe the homeowner money. But if they do their math right, the money they make is still far greater than the money they pay out. Casinos use the same math. Take American roulette. It has 38 slots. 18 are red, 18 are black, and 2 are green. The casino tends to win on those. You can bet on red and win 3 spins in a row, or even 10 spins in a row. But the casino knows with enough time, your wins will get canceled out by your losses, plus a little extra. That's called the law of large numbers. In a small slice of time, you can beat the odds. But with enough play, you can't escape them. Chance is math, but feeling lucky, it's more like magic.
I had many of the gambler philosophies.
Like the gambler's fallacy.
I felt like if there were 4 spins where I didn't win, the 5th spin had to be a big one.
We keep playing because we believe a win is due and are surprised if it doesn't come, because we intuitively think outcomes should break down more or less evenly, even though that's only true for really large samples. And then there's the illusion of control, the belief that you can increase your odds in the face of pure chance. Lottery players know it well.
If I see a bus in front of me, the place number, I will memorize that plate. They don't really mean anything, but in your mind, you're thinking that you're putting something value to it in order to win.
Or take dice. People tend to roll more softly when they're trying to roll a low number. This magical thinking is part of what makes gambling fun. Take slot machines. They're the biggest moneymaker at most major casinos, even though if you strip them down, they're just random number generators, rigged in the casino's favor.
So the original one-arm bandits were mechanical devices that had big levers that you pulled, hence the one arm, right? And you wouldn't even sit down because typically they didn't have seats. They were really meant as entertainment devices to quickly get your money or entertain you while you were waiting in line to play real gambling at the tables.
The invention took off across America. By the 1930s, New York City was home to an estimated 30,000 machines, thanks to the mob, because slots were illegal.
Operation of these machines for many years in New York City has challenged the city authority and the police department.
The mayor launched a war on slots, calling them mechanical larceny because they were secretly rigged. And while he won the battle, the war, not so much. This was the Great Depression, and to raise revenue, Nevada legalized casinos. New York's mobsters headed west.
The main business of the town is gambling, perfectly legal under Nevada law. The most popular form of gambling in Las Vegas is the slot machine, which requires some muscle but no skill. Occasionally he collects a few coins, just enough to keep him playing.
And slot machines have evolved a lot since then.
I met a game designer in Las Vegas once. He drew me a picture on this napkin. It was a simple graph, money and time. He drew a really, really spiky, jagged line.
These were the original slot machines.
It was the experience of someone putting in money, winning a lot, and then losing it all very quickly. Then he drew me another line.
These were the next generation of slot machines. They had chairs, so you could sit down, and no more coin payoffs interrupting your play.
If you let people sit there longer, maybe even made it comfortable and less fatiguing, you could get more money out of them in the end.
And no more handle. Slot machines have a button.
And so you're just there with your finger touching like this.
As often as 20 times a minute. And they kept innovating. The mechanical reels are now screens.
The way that your eyes are directed into the screen, it's all about reducing your fatigue and moving you from one event to the next event to the next event in a seamless and frictionless way.
And with more reels and rows, there were more pay lines, patterns that give you a win. And with penny slots,
you've got 50, 100, sometimes 200 lines. And you are putting in pennies for each line. And if you think about it, if you're betting on 50 lines, you're going to get some of that back almost every time.
It's usually less than what you bet, but it still feels like a win. The industry hit the sweet spot. It learned how to give players
a smooth ride down to zero.
No more big wins or big losses. It just gently drains your money.
That doesn't bring to mind gambling and suspense and risk and volatility. It brings to mind comfort and rhythm and lulling. And this is exactly how regular slot machine players talk about their experience.
It's soothing for me and kind of takes me away from everything for a while.
That 3 to 4 seconds that machine was spinning, there's nothing that mattered.
I could sit there for hours and just entertain myself.
I felt free, felt peaceful.
There's a name for this feeling.
The zone is not where you're even worried about winning or being in control. You really just want to keep going.
The zone is the hold, but it all starts with the hook.
It's all about the pause, that moment between when we place a gamble and when the possible outcome may occur.
Monkeys have taught us a lot about this. In one study, researchers gave monkeys juice, and the dopamine activity in their brains increased, a reaction associated with pleasure in humans. Later, the researchers added a step. They gave the monkeys a signal, and if the monkeys touched a lever, then they got some juice. Once they trained the monkeys, signal, touch the lever, reward, they measured the monkeys' dopamine activity. And when the monkeys got the signal, that's when their dopamine activity increased. Then it went down, they touched the lever, and it stayed down, even when they got the reward. There's evidence this happens in our brains too.
We start getting a flutter of dopamine increasing in anticipation of the possible reward.
That's the pause.
It didn't even matter what the spin showed. I got the high off of the actual spin itself, the anticipation of the win.
This uncertainty, which is kind of uncomfortable, but just uncomfortable enough to be appealing.
It is likely that some of that additional dopamine is what makes reward gambling so fundamentally attractive.
And potentially addictive.
Just like drugs, you build a tolerance to the high that you're getting from gambling.
I probably gambled straight for 30, 32 hours.
This is just to show you how much I play over the years.
I lost my house, I lost my car, I lost my belongings, my kids' belongings, my husband's belongings.
Destroyed my marriage of almost 20 years. It hurt everyone I knew.
We know that some factors mean a higher risk for issues with gambling. More than 3/4 of people with a gambling problem have also had an anxiety disorder, and almost as many have struggled with depression or substance abuse. And the more disadvantaged your neighborhood, the higher your risk too. In the poorest American areas, 10% of adults are problem gamblers. But the risk is also higher for certain types of games. According to one study, people who bet on sports or play cards get addicted on average in 3.5 years. But for slot players, it takes just a little over 1.
Every single spin, every single play that an individual does is actually going to give that dopamine response.
Have all those design innovations made the problem worse? We don't know for sure. The ICRG is the largest funder of this type of research, but they haven't looked into it. One possible reason?
They are funded by the gaming industry, which might be somewhat... I mean, I don't know to what extent it is truly problematic. I think it just has the risk of being problematic.
Other major funders of gambling research in the UK and Australia also get a lot of money from industry.
The gambling industry is a prime case of what's called industry capture, in terms of the industry capturing the work of scientists to support what it does and to deflect attention away from the harms that its products and practices creates.
The gambling industry doesn't rig the games like the mob once did.
If you see 3 bars, for example, on this wheel, that doesn't mean that the machine has 3 chances to stop at a bar, because 2 of them are probably dead.
They found smarter, legal ways of getting us to lose. But some people still manage to win.
My name is Semyon Dukac. I run a venture capital fund called One Way Ventures that backs immigrant founders. And long ago, I did play on and helped run one of the MIT blackjack teams.
You might have heard of them.
Blackjack is both a game of chance and a game of skill, right? It's not a perfect game of skill because chance plays a big factor, but it has a component of skill.
And poker is also a game of skill, especially if you're a professional who's won a lot of money playing it.
Maria Konnikova called her opponent's bluff, winning nearly $85,000.
And Maria Konnikova KOs Maduka Marigold. Whoa. He misses on this occasion, and Maria Konnikova survives.
I'm not a gambler, I'm a poker player. Good gambling, which means gambling where you can actually have an edge and take calculated risks, where you're a favorite, where you understand the odds, is much more calculated.
Poker and blackjack aren't games of skill in the same way chess is a game of skill. Modern computers have learned to defeat world chess champions. Every game. That's a pure skill game. If you play perfectly, you're unbeatable. But in 2019, when a computer program named Pluribus played 5 poker pros in no-limit Texas Hold'em, it didn't win every hand. Though it did win the vast majority of them. In both poker and blackjack, there's the luck of the draw. But since there's more skill than chance, the best players still win the long game.
The basic idea of card counting is keeping track of the cards that came out of the deck because that affects the probabilities of the cards that are remaining in the deck.
Here's how to do it. The 30-second version. The count is your record of the cards that have been dealt. The higher the count, the more you should bet. You can ignore these 3 cards, but for every small card that's dealt, add 1 to your count. And for every high card, subtract 1. Because the more high cards that come out in a deal, the less likely you are to get one later. And these cards,
on average, help the player a little bit more than the dealer. When you get into a situation where randomly a bunch of little cards came out, that means there's extra big cards left in the deck. So you would bet a lot more in that situation. That's the basic concept.
If your mind wandered during that, then you probably shouldn't try it yourself.
Let's not kid ourselves. Almost all blackjack players are, in fact, terrible blackjack players. The casinos are in the business of making money. They're not in the business of losing money.
Because casinos are always playing the long game. But it's hard for players to do that. We're human.
We never allow the emotions of winning or losing to interfere with optimal play. That's what made us a professional team.
You have to learn to manage your emotions.
So you can see the patterns that are real and ignore the ones that aren't.
And it's the godfather lesson of poker. It's not personal, it's strictly business.
For me personally, I view the MIT blackjack team as my first startup company and also my first investment fund.
Investing well involves skill, but even if you're really good, there's always an element of chance. In the long run, the market has always gone up. So the longer you let your money sit there, the more likely you are to come out on top. But in the short term, like a single day, it can be a real roll of the dice.
Let me just clarify, day trading isn't investing. Day trading actually is gambling.
Robinhood is one of the most popular trading apps, especially with younger people. When you sign up,
it came reeling up like a slot machine, ding, ding, ding.
3 big question marks. New users get a free stock, or rather, they get to choose it.
I had to take my finger and on my phone actually scrub off one of the question marks, like I was playing a lottery ticket, like a scratch lottery ticket.
You can buy other stocks in a matter of seconds. And when you're not on this app, alerts to price movements nudge you to trade more.
It's good for people to think about investing. It's educational, but it's also dangerous, of course, because if people start day trading, if people start gambling with their investing, then they could lose a lot of money.
The gambling industry has known this simple truth for a long time. When it's easy to gamble, we gamble more. If you live within 10 miles of a casino, you're more than twice as likely to have a gambling problem as someone who doesn't.
Think about people who are online gamblers. They're potentially walking around with a casino in their pocket. I can't imagine how much harder my recovery would have been if I had to think to myself, well, I can just download an app.
When I look this bad, I see part of my life that was really in bad place, but I'm no longer there anymore.
In those rooms in Gamblers Anonymous, I felt like I just made a mistake and that I'm a human.
Whatever works for you, get help. The most important thing is get help.
The availability for gambling is terrible. It's horrible now, and it seems like it's only going to get worse.
In 2020, as the COVID-19 pandemic swept across the globe, sports went on hiatus. Racetracks shut down. Casinos closed their doors.
People are bored, anxious, and isolated.
In the US, trading on Robinhood soared. So did play-in-state digital lotteries, where you can play scratch-offs with your mouse. And online slots, with more themes than you'd see on a casino floor.
Never trust a woman with a grudge.
And internationally, betting on esports, all kinds of them. The online gambling market had already been growing fast, and because of the impact of COVID-19, it's expected to grow even faster. And these games have new ways to keep us playing, like homepages tailored to your tastes, or apps that remind you of your past wins, asking if you want to bet again. The company that designed this feature explained, with this emotional trigger, customers were more likely to stay active. Game design has the potential to hook us more, but we can also make it help. Some gambling machines in the UK are required to get a software update, so if someone plays for too long, it automatically triggers a 30-second cool-off period. But it can't stop us from going back.
Humans gamble because life is a gamble. The future is always uncertain.
6 more, please. 6 more.
When casinos reopened in 2020,
as you can see, the line continues here outside the front doors.
Can you get that money?
the feeling that we can beat the odds and that randomness has design, it runs deep.
Our minds have evolved to be very good at pattern recognition. If you're in the woods and some leaves move, you're going to think there's a tiger. It's a very useful skill to have if you live in the woods, but it's not a very useful skill if you think that you're developing a system to beat roulette.
Because you can't outsmart something when there's nothing to figure out, but it can be really fun to try.
There's always that rush of the chance that something big could happen.
In 2019, a social media craze swept the internet. The age challenge. People shared photos of their faces decades older, using the aptly titled Face App. Even celebrities hopped on the bandwagon. People were seeing their future in focus for the first time, and they were...
My God!
A little freaked out.
Oh my God! Bro, I look insane!
Younger people generally don't like to confront the fact that one day they'll be old. The pictures were like meeting a stranger. And that disconnect, researchers have actually measured it. In one study, people were put in a brain scanner and asked to think about 4 things. Themselves today, a stranger today, that stranger 10 years in the future, and themselves 10 years in the future. Their brains lit up when they thought about their present-day selves. A lot less so when they thought about the stranger. And our brains didn't care much for our future selves either.
I'm Hal Hirschfield. I'm a professor at UCLA's Anderson School of Management.
He was the lead researcher on that study.
Psychologically, people don't identify with who they'll be in the distant future. That future person seems like a stranger to them almost.
And so Hal started researching something he never thought he would. Retirement savings.
I sort of said that sounds incredibly boring. But then that sort of led me to start digging in and thinking about, what are the things that stop people from making the decisions over the long run that could really help them?
If you look at the numbers around the world, we haven't made the types of decisions that look out for our future selves. In most wealthy countries, the average 65-year-old has saved enough to keep their current quality of life until their early 70s, but they're expected to live until their mid-80s or longer. That translates to trillions of dollars in missing savings. And by the time millennials retire, it's expected to be a lot bigger. In the US, over $100 trillion bigger.
Most people will not be able to maintain their standard of living into retirement. Many people will sink from a middle-class life to a near-poverty experience into retirement.
I feel pretty horrible, to be honest with you.
Yo no he tenido opción de hacer un ahorro, digamos, ¿no? Para mi jubilación.
It's really tough to be sure whether what I'm doing right now is enough or not.
I'm very frightened. We really have a crisis on our hands.
Experts suggest that to retire comfortably, a middle-class American should save at least $1 million. If that sounds wildly out of reach, you're not alone. In the US, a quarter of the workforce doesn't have any retirement savings. We might dream that in our golden years we can kick back and relax, but what's the reality? Can we even afford to retire at all?
Thanks to the advancements of medical science, men and women in the autumn of life enjoy better health,
and can expect to live longer.
92% of Americans are not meeting their retirement savings target.
We have to work to do more to ensure that every older American has the resources and the support that they need to thrive.
Price of food's gone up, price of where you live's gone up. Where are you going to get the money to live on?
In 1933, America was in the grips of the Great Depression. Almost a quarter of workers didn't have a job, and half of the country's seniors were living in poverty. Like never before, the country's miseries spilled out onto the streets. That's what Dr. Francis Townsend saw one morning as he looked out his window in Long Beach, California. And the view moved him to draft a radical proposal, a plan to eradicate old age poverty.
Well, Earl, now that you've thought it over and studied my figures, what do you think? We'll call it the Townsend Plan. What do you say? Fine.
Townsend thought every American over 60 should have a guaranteed income from the government of $200 a month, which would be around $4,000 today. Townsend went on the road, spreading the good word that everyone had the right to retire. You see, back then, for many people, the retirement system was...
You worked until you died.
Some lucky people had pensions, but that depended on your job. The idea of a pension is pretty simple. In exchange for your loyalty and service, your employer would support you financially from the day you retire until the day you die. First, they were offered to the military, and later in a variety of other industries. If you think of our modern-day retirement system as a stool, pensions were the first leg. But since most people didn't have access to them, Townsend's plan took off. Within 2 years, 7,000 Townsend clubs had popped up across the nation with 1.5 million members. It was a whole movement, and it pushed the president to sign into law the most sweeping social reform in American history.
This Social Security measure gives at least some protection to millions of our citizens.
Basically, everyone who makes a paycheck now pays into Social Security. You're literally paying it forward, and when you go to retire, you can expect the current workforce to do the same for you. This is the second pillar of the retirement system. And at the time, it redefined the role of government as a safety net for its citizens. But it definitely wasn't Townsend's plan. Everyone wasn't going to get $4K a month.
The Social Security system replaces, on average, about 40% of your pre-retirement earnings.
If you make the average salary, which is around $4,000 a month, you can expect Social Security to pay you something like $1,500 a month.
Social Security is only going to get you so far in retirement.
Even paying out that much takes up almost a quarter of the federal budget. There's no way around it. Retirement is expensive. Which is why there's a third support, your own personal savings. This three-legged stool once seated many retirees comfortably, and a new industry emerged to cater to this new group of people. Retirement communities designed to look like a resort. The first one, Sun City, boasted a Riviera-sized swimming pool, social activities, a cheer team. Retirement as an idea had only really existed for a few decades when it got a new brand as a second childhood, a time of leisure. This is a vision of retirement many of us grew up with, even if most people could never afford it. And then a discovery in 1980 started to shake this system up.
Okay, hey, my name's Ted Benna. I'm commonly known as the father of 401k.
In 1980, Ted was working as a benefits consultant in Pennsylvania when he stumbled upon a new section of the tax code, Section 401, Paragraph K, which let employers give cash bonuses to their employees at a later date, pre-tax. And Ted realized that meant employees could give some of their salaries to themselves at a later date, pre-tax. To encourage employees to do this, employers could promise to match some of that money. He'd invented a whole new kind of retirement account, the 401k. But unlike a pension, which guarantees you a certain payout, with 401ks, the only thing you can guarantee is what you pay into it. How you invest it and the stock market affect what comes out the other end.
The 401k system shifted responsibility from the employer directly to the employee.
Many employers ditched their pension plans, while 401ks took off.
Basically because workers lost bargaining power in the 1980s. It grew to be a substitute for good pensions.
Today, about half of American workers have access to a 401k.
401k was never intended to be our national retirement system.
Otherwise, it would have been called something like
National Retirement System.
401k actually is a fluke legislatively.
And there's pretty mainstream consensus. It hasn't worked out.
The 401k has not been a good deal for most Americans. Most Americans don't have enough saved for their later years.
30 years later, how are the 401k plans doing?
Jill, I think it's time to declare the 401k a failure.
The core problem with this 401k-based system is that it's basically on you to save for your retirement.
Do-it-yourself retirement.
Which means you have to be financially savvy enough to grow your own investments. And also make sure you're not being charged high fees in the background. We also need to save a lot more money than we used to. Back in the glory days of the three-legged stool, retirement was often just 5 or 10 years. Now it can be decades. That's a lot more years of living to fund. Ultimately, everyone finds a different way to pay for those extended years of life, based on the jobs they have, the money they make, and what they do with it. But if you're an average person hoping, somehow, to reach that $1 million goal, first, you'll need an individual retirement account. And a 401k is just one of many options.
I have like 4 different types of retirement accounts.
There's the 401k, there's a traditional IRA.
I have a Roth IRA. I invest in index funds that are equities heavy.
I have a SEP IRA.
An HSA. There's traditional brokerage accounts. The whole concept of how to do it can be really confusing.
And overwhelming. The scoop from financial experts is that if your employer offers a 401k with a match, you should do that. But bottom line, the most important thing is that you save at all, starting as soon as possible, and ideally automated, so money's put away each week or each month without you having to think about it. But deciding to do that for your future self, that's the hard part.
I'm given a choice between doing something that I want to do right now or not doing that and making a sacrifice for my future self's benefit. Well, why should I do that? That guy is a stranger to me. I started thinking with my collaborators, how can we get people to better identify with who they'll be when they retire? And one of the things we hit on was, well, maybe we can try to make that future self more vivid. Can we actually get people to meet their future selves?
So Hal conducted an experiment where he made old-age 3D avatars of the study participants. This was in 2011. Technology wasn't quite as good as FaceApp then.
We tested to see whether or not being exposed to these age-progressed images could motivate people to want to save more. And that's exactly what we found.
Afterwards, the study participants wanted to save twice as much for retirement as a control group did.
The reality is, we make sacrifices for other people we care about all the time. We make sacrifices for our kids and our parents, our spouses, because we empathize with them. And so if we can provoke a sense of empathy for our future selves, then we may be more willing to make sacrifices today for their benefit later on.
But psychological tricks will only get you so far.
60% of the American workforce earned less than $50,000 per year. The average cost of childcare is about $9,000 per year. If you add food, rent, other utilities, bills, the numbers just don't add up.
And for many people, the numbers have never added up. Even in the heyday of pensions, most workers never had one. And when Social Security was first rolled out, agricultural and domestic workers were excluded from benefits, jobs that Black people were more likely to have. And today, many undocumented people are paying into a system that has no plans to pay them back.
Pago mis taxes y aporto al Social Security, pero el hecho de que, digamos, no tengo mis documentos, no puedo reclamarlos.
Over the past 40 years, where we had the rise of tax-favored, do-it-yourself individual accounts, that really benefited the top 20% of workers.
Because they had the extra money to put into those accounts and get the tax breaks, so that money grows even faster. But poorer people can't.
Because of this do-it-yourself system, middle-class workers won't be able to keep their standard of living, and people who are working in low incomes will be quite poor when they retire.
We have millions of people working incredibly hard, and they still could not make ends meet.
When I have real tensions between things that I need to save for right now or spend on right now versus save for in the future, it can be understandable when a lot of workers, especially at the lower end of the income spectrum, need to spend that money today.
And even if you do everything right and save all your life, you could still find your life savings slashed by a recession, like we saw in 2008.
This morning's steep declines on Wall Street hit Americans with already battered 401ks.
Stock market drops have eroded the value of retirement accounts.
One was 80, 88,000, and then it went down to like 50. I've been a career girl all my life, and I don't deserve this. I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Because we've had this narrative or this belief that retirement was your own responsibility, we have in America a huge group of people reaching 65 with a deep sense of shame and anxiety.
I have to depend on the charities and the organizations that I used to be able to abundantly give to. Do I feel shame and embarrassment? Absolutely.
I'm looking into the possibility to return to the workforce so that I can pay it, my retirement just a little bit more.
Because of the setbacks I faced in my life, I see myself working until I'm 70.
Some experts think we should be working longer.
It's good for the economy, for the simple reason that it grows the labor force.
People should, if they can, should be working longer.
And the fact that older people are working longer is just going to be good for the economy. It's going to boost productivity. It's going to make everyone wealthier.
I really hate that formulation. Just because we're all living longer doesn't mean we have to work longer.
At a certain point, people should have the option to rest and to spend their time doing something else besides working. And in America today, it's simply not a choice for many people.
The other problem is that we're not all living longer. We've had such unequal longevity gains that this whole notion is an insult to most people in America.
Most of us will never be able to save $1 million, no matter how hard we try. Our security in old age is the accumulation of all our privileges and all our hardships. Student loans, credit card debts, bouts of unemployment, low wages, medical bills, never owning a home, the inheritance you didn't get, they stack up. Almost 100 years ago, a movement swept America.
We declared it a national goal that everybody deserves to reach old age with well-being and security.
We must face the fact that in this country, we have a rich man's security and a poor man's security, and that the government owes equal obligations to both.
In the 1980s, when we were experimenting or started our experiment with the do-it-yourself system, the UK did too.
And by 2000, reports like this started to come out.
My state pension is £87.50 a week, and on that money, I'm supposed to rent accommodation and survive.
I've got a good family. Mother's Day and Christmas, I have to ask them for clothes.
They reversed course from the American system and mandated that employers provide a pension system, and their pension system is called
the National Employee Savings Trust, or NEST.
Which is a wonderful image of a nest egg.
It's like a mandatory 401k, where you're forced to save 8% of your salary 5% from your paycheck and 3% from your employer. If you earned a median income of about $49,000 a year and invested that much over 40 years, you'd likely not only hit that $1 million marker, but exceed it.
We could fix our American system overnight. We could institute a mandatory savings system for all workers.
Or we could expand Social Security. Remember, it's funded from your paycheck. Right now, about 6% is taken out to fund it, but high earners aren't paying Social Security tax on a lot of the money they make. Because after you've made $137,900 that year, they stop taking money out for the rest of the year. That's known as a regressive tax. And if you're super rich, you could hit that cap in a week. Or if you're ridiculously rich, a day.
They're still getting over their hangovers from their New Year's Eve party, and they've already paid their taxes to the Social Security system. Happy New Year! If we just tax their earnings like we tax everybody else's earnings, so much more money would come into the system, and we could solve poverty and expand benefits. The retirement savings crisis is actually a lot easier to fix than most of our problems. It's easier to fix than climate change. It's easier to fix than health insurance.
I think we just need to start approaching these questions in a more holistic way. The question of retirement security doesn't just affect retirees, it affects everyone in the family. There's been really amazing innovation in recent years around what it means to live well as you age.
Like this old folks home in Seattle that made the news for joining forces with a nearby daycare.
Where the very old and the very young spend their days together.
I love to hug them and squeeze them and sing songs to them.
I've seen the village movement emerge,
which has over 300 registered chapters across the U.S.,
where older people pool resources and get access to services collectively.
So they can afford to do the things you'd see at a retirement community while living in their own homes.
In Hawaii, many communities are living intergenerationally, where elders are actually culturally revered.
Across the U.S., that kind of family structure was once common. But right around the time retirement resort communities were taking off, it started to decline. We were sold a dream, but the reality is, a lot of us will need to rely on our families and friends. That's really the fourth leg of this stool, and always has been.
In this country, our attitudes around retirement and aging have everything to do with the fear of aging and disability. And the way that we've culturally solved for it is to just be in denial. It actually reveals a lot of things about our society, our politics, our culture that we've needed to change for a very long time.
While most of us will never live out that sunny version of retirement,
if we solve for the people who've been hardest to solve for, who've really fallen through the cracks for the longest, we will secure everyone.